They're trying.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, Meg, just in time.
Oh, right, Meg.
I'll turn this over to Lisa to make an introduction.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So today's a little different than how we normally start a meeting. We have about 3 hours, less than that now, to work on the strategic plan for the agency. And many of you will remember when the governor came in January, she gave all agency directors a list of like 11 priorities, basically, that we needed to work on and be accountable to. And we have been meeting those along the way with different projects. One of them is a new agency strategic plan. Our strategic plan was older than 3 or 5. It was older, 5 years, yeah. It's 5 years old, and I think it needed to have been done in the last 3. So we need to do a refresh. And so this is the beginning of it with the board. The staff have done work up to this point with Steve Patty, who is at the table, doing some surveys with staff, with customers, with agency partners, looking at challenges, opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, and Steve will go through all of that with us. And so I'm excited about today and thinking about what our work plan basically should look like for the next 3 years. And there's a format that's been provided to us. And so I think a lot of the work with the board is setting up those high level, I call them key objectives. I'm sure there's a different name for them depending on which strategic plan version you're looking at, to help the board set the direction for us, and then for the staff to go back and work on how we're going to implement those over the next couple of years so that there are measurable goals that we can work through. It might be helpful for Steve if we all go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then let the head table who've done the work introduce themselves. So, how's that?
Good afternoon, I'm Aaron Curtis. I'm representing the Bureau of Animal. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Allen. I'm a non-voting board member representing U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Looks like they got the feds all stacked up. Dan Brown with the EPA, also non-voting member representing the EPA.
Well, here comes a state guy now. So I'm Mark Labhart, and I'm the voting member on the Fish and Wildlife Commission.
Good afternoon, I'm Kelly Coates. I am the tribal representative on the OWEB board.
Bruce Buckmaster from Astoria. I'm a public at large member of the board.
Lisa Sharplow Hansen, executive director with the board.
Liza Jane McAllister, I'm co-chair and from Wallowa County and represent the public at large.
Barbara Boyer, co-chair, representing the State Board of Agriculture.
Lindsay McClary, public at large, voting member. I live in West Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
Meg Reeves, I'm the representative from the Water Resources Commission.
Jamie McLeod-Skinner, member at large, voting member based in Central Oregon.
Steve Brandt, representing Oregon State University Extension.
All right, good afternoon, members of the board. Really glad to be here for this strategic planning session and glad that we have a good block of time to do this. I'm Eric Williams, Restoration Grant Manager at OWEB, and we'll have the panel here introduce themselves.
Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on the OWEB staff.
And I'm Steve Patty with Dialogues in Action based out of Portland and happy to be a friend of OWEB's.
All right, and what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about framing for what we're going to do today, and then Steve and Audrey and I will be filling in components of of the afternoon for you. But just as background, Lisa talked about the directive for all agencies to have strategic plans. I think we've been thinking about it even before that came out. And so just recognizing that a lot of work has happened since 2018 that probably should be expressed in our agency strategic plan. What we thought about when we looked at the 18 plan is that a lot of the foundational materials that, for those of you that were around, were built on really extensive engagement among board staff, partners, sessions out in the communities in Oregon. A lot of that informed what I would call the foundational elements of our plan and is still valid today. And that's the part, if you've looked at the plan recently, that talks about who we are. In all things, we will be bold, we will be open and transparent. And what we believe in. We're dedicated to the idea that healthy watersheds sustain healthy communities now and in the future, and that we take the long view on watershed management and the impact that we want to achieve. Our work is in service to what? To healthy watersheds. So those foundational elements we felt are still as vivid and valid today as they were in 2018. However, we also recognize the need to take another look at the priorities that our plan expressed in 2018 to see how we might have changed those in the last 5 years and then looking ahead into the future. And so that's why we're calling this a strategic plan refresh. And what we'd like to do today with you this afternoon is take a look at or listen to at least some of the input that we have received so far. And we'll talk about the kinds of engagement that we've done. All of you know, of course, Steve had conversations with each of you individually. We've had conversations with many of our partners. Staff have been discussing the priorities and our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats to help inform this plan refresh. So we're going to go over some of the themes that we have picked up in what we've been hearing to date. And that, as Steve had expressed in the past, is part of our Getting Clear phase. And so by the end of the day today, we would like to have a set of revised priorities, a draft of which is in your board books. And for those watching, following along at home, they're in the electronic board book as well. Starting there and talking through some of the feedback and input that we've gotten from the different sources that I've mentioned, and see if we can get to some consensus by the end of the day today on those high-level priorities. And then where we go from there, we've got 2 more board meetings before the plan is due at the end of June. So in January and April, we can talk more in January about the strategies that would implement these refreshed priorities that we're talking about today. And then as we get closer to June, fill in the details of the operational plan, which would be the things staff are going to do to implement those strategies underneath each of the priorities. Let's see. So with that as introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Steve for our first section of the day.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you, board, for dedicating this time this afternoon to strategic planning. We really appreciate it. We've got a number of things to talk through that we need your thoughts and perspectives on. And as we start, I'd like to say a word of thanks to you for the time that you spent this summer in interviews. We really appreciated that time and wrote a brief report on it that the leadership team has spent some time in listening to your feedback that was contributed anonymously. So we just gathered the themes from that. As Eric described, the strategic planning process is following 3 big movements. The movement of getting clear where we listen. This is a phase of orientation to engage externally those out in the communities that you serve, the partners that you have, the stakeholders you engage with, and then also getting clear internally to listen both externally and then internally. And Audrey and I will share with you some of the highlights from that phase here momentarily. And then the centerpiece for our time today will be this piece of getting focused, as Eric described, just to reinforce the primary goal and objective for today is to land on strategic priorities that all of you will affirm, so that then we can go forward from that and do some planning. And that's where we get really specific about strategies, about timelines, about outputs and outcomes and metrics and KPIs and those kinds of things. So just to be clear, we're not going to step into that space today. That will be ensuing. Subsequent to this conversation today, our primary focus is on this phase 2 today. So you are here. We're going to toggle you through a number of slides here to firstly allow you to hear the voices from the Get Clear phase. So I'll share with you some summary perspectives from those external interviews and feedback that we received from the survey. Audrey will talk to you a bit about the internal staff responses as well. So we'd like for you to be able to hear voices and to be able to think about what people are thinking, perspectives that they have. And as you do, bear in mind that whereas every perspective is valuable, not every perspective is as pertinent to the strategic priorities going forward. So there will be some perspectives that you will want to tune into more clearly than others. And there'll be some perspectives that are actually asking for you to do things that OWEB is unable to do. But we want you to hear it nonetheless so that you can see what people are thinking out there and what they're expecting of you as well. It might just then be a responsive communication too. So in other words, you don't have to respond to all of these areas of feedback. We will walk you through some of the highlights, and as we do, I invite you to think about what in particular we should tune into, and maybe even make a note or two, and then we will spend a few minutes just sharing here around this table what you think is most valuable to pay attention to. So we'll do a first movement with external voices and then a second movement with internal voices. We'll take a break, and then we'll dive into the strategic priorities going forward. Does that sound good? Okay. So objectives for today: to tune in, to focus, and then we'd like to ask for your guidance going forward. The external listing was based on 26 in-depth interviews with stakeholders, as well as a survey for customers, around 100 or so responses there. So I'll talk about that. Internal listing, 6 staff focus groups, 2 in-depth all-staff sessions, and then interviews with you, the board. Along the way, there's been a team of 6 staff and managers that have been guiding the process. They've been thinking about this, working through the data that's come in, and then they have been the architects of this draft that you have in front of you as they processed all of this. Okay, so the external voice. We have more data here than we will walk through carefully, but just so that you can be exposed to it. We'll talk about the strengths, kind of a classic SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths. You are trusted and trustworthy. The agency has earned trust through people that work at the agency. We just heard that so clearly. Operational quality. You get the money on the ground for meaningful projects. People spoke very clearly about their trust in how you operate. And that was just a theme that kept coming up time and again. Related to that, your competence, expertise of staff in both the acquisition of restoration work, as well as just this confidence that you know OWEB what you're doing and you do it well. Related to that as well, quality of staff. The voice of the community and your partners was very clear about how much they appreciated OWEB staff, the ability to recruit, hire, retain good, experienced staff, and the strong human relational dynamic that is experienced as they interact with OWEB Relationships have extended beyond the grantee-granting agency relationship and in many cases into trusted colleagues. You are present, attentive, and involved. One example, an interviewee, OWEB's really in tune with what's happening with watershed councils. And this theme surfaced time and again about how connected you are. Partnership oriented. If we encounter a problem, OWEB staff try to help find a solution and get to yes. That last quote as well, you were coachable. We weren't concerned about asking you questions because everyone would make sure the program worked. It was flawless on our end. Solution focused as well. Responsive and adaptive. OWEB is process oriented and has built a process that works but is always learning and adjusting when needed. Strategic. OWEB takes a holistic approach to statewide restoration and one of the few funders offering organizations mid to long-term investments instead of one-off projects. Building shared commitment and coalitions, the unique position you have to form positive relationships between state government and local communities. The strengths go on and on here. Clarity, transparency, and that is a list of, that's not a comprehensive list, but an illustrative list of the voices that we heard related to strengths. All right, let's do weaknesses. So as interviewees and as survey respondents reflected on areas of growth, here are some of the categories. So limitations of resources, you would imagine people would say this, not enough money. Not enough money. It'd be great if you had more resources. The process for a number was burdensome and have been burdensome. Applications very long and burdensome for both applicants and reviewers. Limitations of engagement and awareness of local context. I should have mentioned earlier, as you hear these perspectives, some of these perspectives will be contradictory perspectives. On the one hand, people will say, we really appreciate your engagement. And then sometimes you also hear, well, there's room here for growth too. Lack of flexibility, particularly related to COVID and the consequences of COVID on the partners that you have, and then your requirements of them. There's some stress that people are feeling related to that. Need greater emphasis on monitoring and evaluation, particularly monitoring funding, gap in awareness and outreach to community to increase the diversity of our constituencies. So this is our representing the whole state. You see this then rendered in one of the priorities that we're proposing going forward. Need to demonstrate progress and tell the story. So this was a theme of people don't know as well as they should the value that OWEB is bringing, the impact that it's having. Can we leverage the story here? Some concerned about priorities. Given what OWEB is being asked to do, concerned about some, is there mission creep? And is OWEB focusing on the kinds of things that really are central to the mission and cause and mandate? Need greater attention to knowledge management, concern about the future as well. Lack of regional voice and priorities. A few felt that the decision-making is sliding more toward board, toward centralized, toward staff, and less responsive to voices in the community. Lack of staff capacity. They are seeing just how much OWEB is doing. Seems like a small group of people are taking care of a lot of needs across the state, for example. Need greater focus on capacity funding. Improve ability to meet needs of all in community. Particularly here related to DEI opportunities as well as tribal opportunities too. Okay, so quite a few weaknesses there, some gaps. So that's 2 categories. You doing okay so far? I know it's a lot. Okay. Why don't we do opportunities and threats, and then we'll pause, and we'd like to hear from you what would be important for OWEB to tune into going forward. So opportunities, facilitate peer learning, particularly related to project implementation and design, provide more training and support. There's a number who asked for, so appreciated what OWEB staff was providing, that they wanted more of that, more engagement, more training. More education of communities. This relates a bit to the public perception of what is the value of OWEB, as well as the need for watersheds as well. And notice that last bullet point, landowners and community members don't always understand OWEB and its funding sources too. Strategically engage communities, help inform small communities, increase their access to funding, increase their capacity to help fund things such as water infrastructure. So you see a lot of opportunities here for like communication and engagement publicly, which is why that the first priority is proposed. And then DEI as well here, pursue further DEI implications. And even some training and development and support capacity building. Bullet 3, help local watershed councils and SWCDs reach out to marginalized communities. So they're not just asking for OWEB to do that, but for OWEB to facilitate and train and catalyze that more broadly. Oh, and I just lost the slide there. Leverage other funding opportunities. That might not be exactly in the center of your mandate there. Pursue monitoring and evaluation of outcomes. Implement more expansive programs. People want more. Strengthen partnerships. Voice came through. Expand eligibility. So who is eligible to receive and apply for certain grants? Build institutional knowledge management. Advance, this was a significant one, advance tribal engagement as well. There's a recognition that you are doing tribal engagement, but just a number of voices saying it would be great if there was more. And then concern about staff, the opportunity. So you hear some themes running through all these, and the staff capacity theme is a thread that weaves its way through all of these categories as well. Climate resiliency, and convening, collaborating, increasing profile and expanding impact. So a lot of people were asking for OWEB to do more than what it is, which I recognize is complicated. And then focus on climate resilience. All right, there were a lot of opportunities. It's actually in summary, there are 2 slides here, opportunities. All right, one more category, and then would love to hear what you think about this. So these are threats. Drift in the focus, mission creep, drifting, taking on outside of your lane and outside of your focus. There's concern about that, as well as some drift of what's central to your mission and cause. Climate change, of course, a huge threat to the work that you're doing, and you board members talked about that clearly in the one-on-one interviews that I had with you. The length of time to see impact. So this had to do with making a case for the value of watershed work, that a lot of your work just takes so long for you to see impact in, that there was concern, there was a threat that people would get restless and would be distracted to doing other kinds of things. Limitations of staff engagement, that's right. Perils of centralized decision-making, you hear this again. Lack of connection to DEI among rural communities, and the definition and understanding of DEI across the state, representing that, instead of solely a DEI that is defined by urban communities. Staff capacity, lack of diversity in OWEB staff and board, a threat as well. Onerous processes, lack of diversification in funding. Some are concerned about where your funding is coming from, and believing that there's some tenuousness to that as things go forward. Distracting projects here as well. Let's leave that slide up for a moment. As OWEB takes on more specialty programs, Oregon Ag Heritage and others, it becomes harder to stay on track and make efficient use of limited funds. Too many restrictions on fundings, capacity limitations, scope limitations, precarious funding, prohibitive costs of projects as costs are raised, and discontinued projects. I think that is all. I know that is a lot, but just really wanted you to get the sense of the full breadth of the voices there. Before we talk together about this, and we have a few minutes set aside for full board conversation, will you mind just for a few minutes turning to the person next to you and processing this with them? What seems to be elevated in your mind about what's most important in this external feedback? What are the areas that we need to tune into? And I know some misperceptions out there and some things that are contradictory, but as you hear all of this, kind of what are the parts of this that need to be tuned into? Maybe if you might just lean into the person next to you, have a brief conversation, 2-3 minutes about that, then we will hear this all together.
Sure.
Those two issues affected me, two maybe because I've been intimately involved with both of them, but I remember 3 years ago, one started Klamath. And you're seeing what you're seeing now. Groups like OWEB, the OECD is pushing out things and cold.
Given what you heard from the voices outside of OWEB as they hold perspectives on OWEB, what is most important to you as a board as you heard that? We wanted to give you kind of a full breadth of the voices there. So as you process all that, what is sitting with you that we need to kind of elevate here for our conversations?
Yeah, I'm not going to address that, but But I had a clarifying question, and that is the material you showed us strictly from the external stakeholders, or was it a combination of external and internal?
That was strictly from the external stakeholders.
And did you evaluate the internal, or was there overlap? What's the?
Yes, internal is coming in just a moment. Audrey will walk you through the staff internal. Yes, and there is quite a bit of overlap. You'll start to hear some themes amongst the themes there.
Well, then let me make just a general comment. Again, not answering your question, but it seemed to me the types of responses, I would almost categorize them into two things. One is OWEB as an agency and how it operates and what it does and so forth. And the second is sort of watersheds and restorations as an issue of importance to stakeholders. For example, we need education, better to educate the community about restoration value, whether or not that's an OWEB responsibility or not. In a sense that is there any way to look at those two things?
Yes, and I wonder, Eric, if just in a few moments you might make some comments about that. A small group of staff and managers that have been thinking this through and walking through the data have been pulling those apart a bit because to your point, the desire of those in the community doesn't align exactly with the mandate of OWEB as well. So I don't know, Eric, do you want to speak to that now or?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think we did see quite a bit of that, Steve, in the feedback, because there's, I think, woven throughout the comments, a lot of themes around the need for broader understanding of why watersheds are so important. And yes, we do some of that, but we do have some constitutional restrictions on our funding around what kind of actions we can fund. And those are the things we do, right? We're a funding agency. So there is going to be some tension there. And when we get to looking at the priorities, I think you'll see how we've tried to address that. But I think that tension's always going to be there. It was there last time too, when we went through the process.
Thank you. Kelly, did you have a comment?
Yeah. Oh, it's working. We're good. Yeah, Kelly Coates for the record. What stood out for me was the tribal engagement piece from the external stakeholders. I think that's really important, and it came up a lot. And I was actually wondering if we could go back to the slide that specifically talked about that, just so I could read the whole thing. I also, Lisa, Bruce and I were discussing how climate and DEI came up quite a bit as well. So on the one hand, some of the comments and statements are sort of reinforcing what we're already doing, which feels good. Like we're on the right track with that, which is good. But also the fact that they commented so much on those makes me think maybe folks don't really understand how much work we're doing around those right now too. So those were a couple of my comments.
Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, as well as the minute to process with another board member. That was really helpful, so thanks for that. Something that jumped out to me that kind of hits home is the public perception and engagement, and then also facilitating peer learning. And I think as I was speaking with Meg, there's the OWEB board, there's the staff, there's the grantees that receive. And so we're kind of in this little clique and we're really good in our little bubble, but we may not be as great engaging in the public who doesn't do this work. And when you are someone who is in this world and is used to acronyms and does the work, it all makes sense. But even just hearing that maybe why watersheds are important is not being expressed publicly. And I'm probably too far in the weeds on this, but as I'm just thinking, want to be very mindful about OWEB staff and the capacity issues and concerns. But I would love to see us maybe do an annual open house in each region where we can have grantees have posters and talk about projects that are being done in the watershed, public can come and learn, public can ask questions about how to get funding. There could be a panel with Q&A for who has grants, who can talk about them, and people can ask them questions. Very detailed and in the weeds, but thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, did we get copies of what you were just presenting, or was that purposely we weren't to get copies?
No, you did not get copies of what's being presented. And what we did when we collected all of this input is we were very clear with everyone that everything would be kept anonymous. And so we are not attaching any name or organization to any of these comments. But the volume of material there is so much that we wanted to try to draw the themes out of it for you. Because looking at the raw data, you would see what Steve showed on his slides multiplied by 10 with similar kinds of thoughts and statements. And so we're trying to put this in a digestible format, but not too brief, because we are spending the half a day to talk about it. So that's how we arrived at the presentation format for today.
Okay, so Dan and I both thought that the positives were great and spent a little time there, but we should have spent more time on those opportunities because you were going through them really fast. So, because that's where we can look for improvements. One of the things I picked up on, and I guess this is just human nature from the external groups, some of them, at least the perception that I got in going through this pretty fast was, if you didn't get funded or you didn't get what you wanted, maybe we weren't here, the board didn't listen to us, or the board didn't do this, and that we're just rubber stamping the staff's presentation. And so that bothered me a little bit because, at least I think we can speak for ourselves. We spend a lot of time really reviewing the applications, and I try to be independent thinker and not just, the staff does the homework and I listen to them very carefully, and we try to listen very carefully to the presentations that the external groups are lobbying for. And if you get funded, you say, God, it was great. They listened to us and we got funded. If you didn't get funded, well, how come they didn't listen to us? So it's partly human nature, but we probably can maybe some of these times spend a little more time with these opportunities for when it's really important to these either watershed council or groups that are applying for FIPS or whatever, to really dive into some of these things and let those applicants spend a lot of time with us so that we can go back and forth and make decisions on that. So picked up on that a little bit because it's really important to these groups that are applying for this, red tape process that they go through, and sometimes that we get a little frustrated when they don't get funded. So picked up on that.
Kelly asked for the slide to come up, so I was going to let her follow up.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a chance to read the slide. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then I just want to comment really quick on something that Mark said. I think that came through, but then on the other side, there were comments about how decisions are being made at the board level that are removed from the local level too. So we're seeing a bit of that push and pull there with those decision-making authorities. And is it the board making the decision, or are we really relying on what staff is telling us at the local level too? I don't know if we're ever going to make everybody happy with that one, but both of those came through for me too.
Okay, Bruce, and then Dan.
I think that what affected me was the overwhelming input or feedback of the caring, competent, collegial perception of our staff. That has to be the envy of a lot of agencies, both federal, state. That one's not broke, so let's not fix it. And the last one, and it goes along with what Kelly and we were talking about, and that is, I think there's a time lag that is reflected in the feedback you're getting and the work that we're doing. 4 years ago, when we started on climate, there was a lot of, hit the brakes. Let's slow down to go fast. There are a lot of, and now we're hearing feedback saying, this stuff's important. And we're well on our way to having those elements of the program and criteria of climate incorporated throughout OWEB. And so there will be with some of these new projects, a resolution, the first board resolution on climate, and now the upcoming board resolution on DEI, environmental justice, these things. I think this highlights to me that there's a time lag between the work we're doing, the resolution that we finally agree upon, and the implementation. And in some cases, there's a little bit of wait for me, I'm your leader. So.
Dan.
I kind of forgot what the question was.
With all of this feedback, what should we tune into in particular?
Gotcha. Okay. I also thought, like, what jumped out at me was this perception that the local information is not being fully considered, and that seems, I was really just super surprised by that. Given the amount of investment that OWEB makes into building the local capacity and funding these watersheds, I mean, it just like, what's missing there? That's all. It's kind of fascinating to me that popped out.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. I think that's one of those topics on which there were a couple of conflicting messages. There were quite a few messages that talked about the connection to local regional organizations and issues favorably, particularly mentioning our regional staff and how wonderful it is for those folks to have accessibility to those regional staff that know those locales really well and know the players well. So that did come through in the comments. And that's, I think, what makes this so challenging to try to draw themes out of this, because you are going to see directly oppositional comments within each of these topics that we're talking about.
Chris.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Another comment on the strengths and weaknesses. Steve, from your slides, it's clear that if you were weighing the volume of comments, that the strengths of what OWEB's doing would probably far outnumber the weaknesses. But I was curious, looking at some of those weaknesses that were identified through our external comments, and maybe this is a bit more of a process question, but I suspect there's a lot of that is perception, right? As to whether it really is a weakness and whether OWEB as an agency can acknowledge that it is a true weakness, or whether there are some of those comments that came in that pointed out weaknesses that are perception, that aren't reality, and that OWEB could point to certain comments and say, well, actually, we hear you, but we're doing this and this and this and this to address what you've identified as a weakness. So I guess I'm just curious how staff review those comments regarding weaknesses and identify which are more substantive and which are really misperceptions. And of course, I know that's challenging and there's a gradation, but I'm just curious, maybe Eric, you can address that.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Chris. There were an awful lot of comments along those, and I had that in my notes too, recapping this session, that some of the appreciation expressed is tempered a bit by frustration with burdensome processes, bureaucracy. There was even a quote in there about concern that OWEB is taking on more of a, quote, police role as a funder. And those concerns are very real. I don't think all of that is perception. I think those are very real concerns. And to Bruce's point about sometimes there's a time lag, we're about to unveil a streamlined application for our core grant programs in January that is a direct response to this kind of feedback, which we have also heard in our annual customer service surveys and in other forums too. You've heard it in public comment from folks that come to you at our quarterly meetings. And so I think those concerns are real. And I also think that we have taken a big bite out of that in looking at our application, but we also have a lot more that we can do, I think, in terms of process and procedures. Yes, we have some limitations with technology, but that's on our radar too, to figure out how can we address those.
And if I may say a word of agreement, having spent a lot of time in the data, that you're right, the great weight of the responses are positive, and much of the areas of weaknesses are, we want more of the good things that you're doing that people are asking for.
Jamie? Well, thanks for providing this information, walking us through it. I was like swelling with pride at all the, not at all surprised, but really delighted to hear the positives about staff. And I hope, Lisa, that everyone on the team got to see those and hear those, because it just reinforces the tremendous work that we all know is happening. I'll also, for the humility of the board, mention that it's like that had nothing to do with us. That was all on the staff side, but it was really just a real delight in hearing that, something that we know in our experience, and delightful to hear that in the community as well. And I hope all the staff members who I know work incredibly hard really take that to heart and heard that. I thought a couple things jumped out at me. One is that that information that the community needs versus the responsibilities of OWEB, so that potentially doing more, but the limitations of what we can do. I think and there's, measure 76, and there are those limitations. I know that I've gotten pushback on, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? For Lisa and also your predecessor. So I think having that information out there just is helpful for all of us. And I know that's also part of this process. So we're looking at what are the resources available and how we lean into that. When you were talking about that tension between more flexibility on things and also the mission creep concerns, direct tension, my mind jumped to, we call it crosstabs when you do surveys of like, okay, are we seeing these kind of grouped by more traditional versus non-traditional partners? Some of the things we've really been leaning into in putting a lot more, creating a lot more awareness around, like our DEI work more recently, is that, and so I'm kind of curious if there are some general categories that are falling into similar themes there. And then on the DEI, and I appreciate the comments about, maybe the public isn't aware of the work we're doing, but I would also challenge us to think about what's our level of self-awareness. So if we can do some of those deep dives of, well, what do you mean by that? Because we might say, well, we're starting to do some of that work, and members of the community might say, that's great, but that's not what we're talking about. And so I think that ongoing education and learning and us being able to hear that and find ways to hear that, I think would be extremely helpful, because that's not something you do when you're finished, you check the box. This is ongoing learning and growing. And so, so I'm really excited as we look at the plan on how we incorporate that. And then just similar to Steve, we mentioned this, I'm really looking forward to the next step of hearing those similarities and differences between that internal awareness and that external perspective. But thank you so much.
Thank you. And is that an okay segue into the?
I have one more comment.
Yes, please.
I just waited till last. One thing I saw, and it agrees with my experience. I think I'm 6 years plus on the OWEB board, and received funding from OWEB for a project. And I would say 9 out of 10 people that I interact with and talk about OWEB do not know what OWEB is. And my circle isn't big, but like legislators, like people don't know what OWEB is. I don't know if that's our job, actually, but it's good to know, and I saw that reflected here in just misinformation, where our funding comes from, or what we do, and what we don't do. And so I think that's an area to talk about. Yes.
Steve, when you were talking to the external stakeholders, did you get a quick response from them that said, thank you for asking? Was there a number of them that said, geez, thank you for asking, we do have input?
This is a great question. All the external interviews were conducted by staff, and then I just did the analysis of the data. So let me turn to staff for that.
Yeah, and Audrey, please do chime in. I think that, yes, we did hear that. And we had people on our list who really aren't customers of OWEBs too. And so their response is, yeah, I don't know much about you, but yeah, thank you for, picking my brain and asking me about this. And I think our challenge was we couldn't reach out to the thousands of people that we would like to reach out to individually. We had to take a subset and reach as many as we can. But yes, that was a pretty common expression. Audrey?
Yeah, thanks. I would just add, it was just at your question, it was a real mix of folks immediately saying, yes, I'd love to be spending that time with you to talk some more. And it's late August and a lot of folks were quite busy as well.
We good? Okay.
Thank you. We also listened to staff. So we listened externally, which is what you just heard. And then we also listened pretty extensively internally as well. Audrey, will you take us through the findings here?
Yeah. Thank you. For the record, Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator. At OWEB, there are 37 staff positions, including several limited duration positions, folks that are engaged in the work of the agency and providing some accomplishments that you've seen in the quarterly reports that have come to the board. To start with, this is the agency's culture statement. It is a product of that 2018 strategic plan thought process. And I just want to highlight three things that really jump out from the culture statement. We are dedicated to OWEB's mission, nimble, adaptable, and continually improving. And the rest of the slides that I will share are results from focused discussions of the 37 staff, including managers and our executive director, that spent some time and reflected on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then there's a new section that I'll get into in the second half of the presentation about circumstances within which we do our work. And so leading directly really from that culture statement, staff identified some strengths, the mission focus, dedicated to continual improvement, a very strong orientation toward customer service and helping grantees who are on the ground doing the work of the agency, the work in implementing the investments. And just to call out a couple of other things, staff called on the work that has been done around equity, inclusion, and diversity, and how much has been learned and reflected internally on that front. On the flip side, and you might hear me say this more than once in my presentation, on the flip side of those strengths are some weaknesses around a number of new programs, a growing portfolio, limitations in capacity, limitations in technology, and really looking for some focus, help prioritizing and directing the agency's efforts. And reflecting for a minute on some opportunities, of which there are many, to highlight a couple. And right at the top couple here on this list are another example of where there's a little bit of tension and some differences and different ways of looking at things. So there's an opportunity to administer new programs, an opportunity to adapt and receive and administer different funding sources. There is also an opportunity to streamline and reduce some of the programs and the associated requirements with them. There's really a strong opportunity for the agency to remain relevant, and that means working with our partner agencies and tribes and collaborators to really retain highly qualified review team members, collaborate with those other agencies where we have areas of mutual interest, and leverage federal money. And then finally, a couple of sort of more administrative opportunities. There's an opportunity for us to improve internal communication among all these new programs, and an opportunity for staff, managers, and leadership to get on the ground and meet with partners and really see what's happening to really understand watershed health. Reflecting for a minute on threats articulated by staff during these focus groups and all staff meetings. There's some concern around, is restoration working for the salmon? Is the watershed investments that the state's making, are they being effective? Are they doing what was intended? There's some concern around a perceived threat or concern around the current funding model. Is there sufficient funding for operations and administrative work compared with the dollars that are going out in terms of grants? There's a concern around the perceived danger of mission creep and maybe taking on too many programs, and a real interest in maintaining capacity to do that high quality work, and specifically perceived threats around, do we have enough staff so that we can back one another up? Is there a succession plan? Are we working in a sustainable way? And are we able to really transfer knowledge as folks move on or move around? There's a worry that the legislature doesn't understand the work of the agency, and a number of threats just around impending economic downturns and crises. And next, I'm going to share a series of slides that will kind of build out on exactly that last point. So as part of the strategic plan refresh in these staff focus discussions and all staff meetings, we learned a new acronym, PESTLE. It stands for PESTLE, as in a mortar and pestle. And we will step through the political, economic, environmental, social, technological, and legal circumstances within which the agency works. And this is part of the Governor Kotek's requirements for the updated strategic plan. So it's something that the staff were able to contribute to the process that's new at this point. And it also has been a great opportunity for those new staff, new programs to express their perspective on these circumstances that affect the work of the agency. And so the first one, we'll take a look at our political circumstances affecting the work of the agency. OWEB has traditionally had a broad political support, and folks are worried. Politics, the legislature is not predictable. There's a concern the legislature doesn't understand what it takes to accomplish the work. The state is divided and anti-government sentiment is real. And there's a concern that OWEB is not as visible with the legislature as maybe some other state agencies are. And I think there's a concern around the words that we use for inclusion, equity, and diversity. And are we meaning the same thing when we say those words in various conversations? Or is everyone on the same page about what that means? And each of these slides also calls out a quote that's directly from staff from one of these focused discussions that we held. This one is about short-term funding being offered to programs really intended to have that long-term benefit and long-term investment. Thinking about environmental circumstances that affect the work of the agency, we've talked about there's remaining concern about salmon. Although much has been invested in salmon habitat restoration, we still are concerned about their extinction. Is it enough? Has it been the right things? There are other threats coming along with a changing climate, changes in fire dynamics, drought, tree mortality, grasslands. There's an interest or awareness that OWEB's role may need to expand to address natural disasters. And there's a real recognition of the need for long-term planning for climate impacts. At the same time, here's another flip side, there is, along with the work that the agency has undertaken to address climate, there's concern about a burden on applicants, review teams, and the process, additional preparation needed in project planning with those climate criteria, and a recognition communities also need maybe other types of assistance to be resilient to climate. We hear about housing and disadvantaged communities maybe being more susceptible to the impacts of climate and these natural disasters, at the same time unable to mitigate and maybe needing some help there. And we are worried about the potential for another big earthquake. So there are some environmental circumstances within which the agency operates. Some social circumstances affecting the operations of the agency. A big one, really, we talked about community engagement. And it's challenging to, it's a strong known need to engage youth and educate. However, OWEB's Measure 76 investments cannot accomplish that. There's concern around diversity of language, communication. Staff may feel they need some additional assistance with communication and communicating in different languages. And really challenging working in urban environments under the kind of current project guidelines there. And there are technological circumstances that affect the work of the agency. Information overload can be overwhelming for everyone, especially for local partners when they've already got a full plate. On the flip side of that, technology often looks like it might be a cure for many of these problems, but OWEB's technology is under strain and maybe not compatible with growing agency needs. And there's a lot of interest around mobile platforms. There's a recognition of the need to continue to work virtually. That gives us a lot of opportunities for public engagement, but it also comes with that reliance on technology. Local partners ask for a lot of training in the world of technology, but as the quote really pulls out, it's hard to have time to take advantage of that training. And then a lot of the availability of drones and LiDAR and other technologies are generating lots and lots and lots of data. It's giving us the ability to do more monitoring and collect data. That comes with the need to really analyze, evaluate, and make use of that data. So touching on two more kind of categories, legal circumstances affecting the work of the agency reflected on by staff. There are a lot of different funding sources that have their different stipulations and different requirements. Several examples are listed here. And then calling out really water right laws definitely needed some attention, some updating, and kind of attention around the number of transactions that are being asked for compared with a small group of skilled implementers. And the last couple are really around the work of the agency and the board work. Folks were talking about wanting that better documentation and sharing out of OWEB discussions and decisions from various meetings. And then really, is there an opportunity to clarify OWEB's role as a non-regulatory agency? What does that mean? What does that look like? And then really calling out that quote regarding the challenge under a lot of the funding that the agency administers, really not being able to be spent on education challenges us in getting information out to the next generation. And the last kind of acronym, E and the PESTLE acronym, economic circumstances definitely affect the work of the agency. Economic variables are really in flux quite a lot, and especially as under impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, and budgets are really no longer feasible in the current market. We all know about inflation. It's more expensive to run operations type work, and projects are really more expensive. On the staff and recruiting side, so thinking about staff in the industry kind of writ large within the agency, and then grantee organizations as well, it's challenging to recruit. There are really not enough folks that are trained in the trade industries to do some of the work that's being asked of grantee organizations. This leads to competition for qualified folks. And then other circumstances in the economic realm, property prices are increasing, there's demand for housing, and really inflation and cost increases kind of all around. And that is kind of a run through of the PESTEL and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats kind of results out of the staff focus groups in 2023. Thank you.
And before we have the board talk this through, Eric, are there any other elements of this that we should highlight for the board?
Thanks, Steve. I think what I would say about that is that it's very clear the customer service ethic that staff have, and a lot of the concerns that you heard stem from that, because we want to provide the best service that we possibly can. And some of the things that are mentioned, like mission creep, maybe the legislature doesn't understand our business, those things I don't think are concerns in and of themselves. They're concerns as they relate to being able to provide the best service to our customers. And I think the infrastructure piece that Audrey pointed out, I think is always front of mind for staff. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, that's something we recognize we need to keep working, keep planning, keep improving on. So thanks for that, Steve.
We are loading you up as a board to be thinking about the strategic priorities going forward. Why don't we take a few minutes for your reflection on this? Are there elements of this that you'd like to highlight or underscore or elevate?
Meg? Thanks. I was trying to draw any threads I could between the internal and the external, and there are a lot of them, and again, my brain is going to, I think, a place where it kind of already was, because I'm having a hard time making sense of that much information at once. But one of the things that speaks to me is the scope of the agency's mandate, basically, in this world that we live in now. And it's mentioned in the external comments, both as it's not broad enough, and we're moving away from our mission, or our mission is not as broad as it should be. And we saw some of that in the staff comment too. One of the quotes was that OWEB's mission might need to broaden. And where I think about this is mostly in connection with water. We had a presentation at the Water Resources Commission last meeting about atmospheric rivers and big water events and how Oregon is poised to deal with them. We were focused on dam safety because that's our mandate, but natural infrastructure is huge. And whether a natural infrastructure project can be funded that is designed to protect humans is, that's a tough question for OWEB, I think, and I'm afraid maybe the answer is no, but it's a gap in the state's preparation, and so the scope issues really jump out at me, and it's hard when you're already trying to do everything you've been asked to do to say, well, maybe we need to broaden the scope, but we are talking about strategic planning, so we're at a level where we could at least talk about that. But I like that. Can I just say too that the staff's work on this was terrific, for the reasons that you raised, Eric, that it's all focused on, are we doing what needs to be done for the state? And it's like a great list. You want to put it in front of the legislature and say, somebody needs to be doing this stuff. It's not necessarily us, but it needs to happen. I think I really liked the work that you guys did. So thank you for that. Mark?
It's really great to hear, when you were going through this, I'm going, yes. When you talk about dedicated staff, customer service, nimble and improving. So the 4 years I've been on this board, that's exactly what I see in staff. It's dedicated. They seem to really enjoy their job. It's fun to give away money for sure, but giving it away appropriately. So when you said dedicated, customer service, nimble, improving, I'm glad to hear that. I've talked to Lisa about this a number of times. I think the legislature clearly clearly here's OWEB, and that's a negative. I'm going to be sarcastic here because you've heard me use the analogy of the TV commercial, give it to Mikey, he'll eat anything, you know, and everybody's sitting around and, well, let's give it out to Mikey and see if he likes it, you know. That's what the legislature does to us is, we'll give it to OWEB. They do a really good job. And so then you know, it's tough to tell a legislator who is directing you with funding and staffing and those kind of things to say, well, no, sir, we can't take that on, you know. But it's tough because it's a kind of a push-pull. It says a lot that for the agency that we know they do a good job, so let's give it to them. And then, well, where's the staffing? Where's the do that? Are we still within our box of our mission? Are we mission creeping because legislatures, well, we'll just give you the, you know, the Ag Heritage Program. Well, that's kind of in your box. You do a really good job. So that's a little bit of a frustration for me, and you've heard me say that before. And then a question, you mentioned, Audrey, about collaborating with other agencies and tribes. Do we have issues there that we're not getting appropriate collaboration with some of the agencies in terms of being able to participate when we ask?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it was really around the remain relevant and maintain the working relationships that we have so that we can continue to really recruit those qualified review team members and where needed, identify problems that are affecting the work getting done and raise them as necessary.
Okay.
So it's about maintaining what we've got and not losing it.
Okay. And then the last comment I have, you know, is it working? I face that as a Fish and Wildlife Commissioner all the time. Is what we're doing working? You know, sometimes we think it is, sometimes we're not. So that's a tough question to ask. We put millions and millions and millions of dollars into improving watersheds for various reasons, and we always have to ask ourselves, is it working? Is it doing the right thing? So we ought to continue to ask that question, and sometimes we may have to pivot a little bit to say, well, we need to do this because this isn't working or this is. So, but that's a good question to always ask ourselves. Is it working what we're doing?
Anybody else? Jamie?
Yeah, and first of all, for those who maybe don't have gray in their hair, the reference to the Mikey commercial, Google it. It goes way back. I love it, Mark, but I'm just imagining how many people listening is like, what are you talking about? It is it's a perfect example if you've seen the commercial, but it's been a while. Three things came to mind for me. One is a sense of what we can control. Actually, first of all, great job. It's really comprehensive, a lot of thought went into this. So the first thing is things we can control versus things we can't control. So climate and cost of living and all those challenges, it's huge. And then for what we can control, how, you know, do we limit or do we keep trying to grow? I mean, that tension, I know that's part of the conversations that we're here to have. Also, that kind of scope and mission creep is tied into that. And it feels so much like the yes, but. It's like, yes, we need to be thinking larger because our understanding of the world has changed and also the world is changing. So that adaptability, and yet how do we focus limited resources? So just, again, reflecting the tension there. But one of the things that did come up, and it was part of what, to Meg's comment, was that leveraging some of the other resource and expertise, but is there an opportunity, and I know, Lisa, you do this with some of your peers, and the governor's office is thinking about this as well, but that big picture thinking so that as other projects, both OWEB and non-OWEB projects are going forward, can we leverage and influence such that they have a positive impact in the other kinds of things that we're working on? And really then thinking not just, you know, to next biennium, but the next generation. How are we adding that? You know, whose role is it to have that big picture thinking? And then how are those partnerships to be able to say that as, you know, some other project goes through, that there's kind of that OWEB hat at the table saying, oh, but if you did it this way, it could also help the streams. And so I don't know if that's there. I know there are partnerships, but how do we really get that 35,000 foot level, and whose role is that?
All right, I've got a couple of standouts from this, from Audrey's presentation. I found it fascinating that one of the quotes was, it's difficult to work in the urban area under the current guidelines. So that stood out to me. And then I've always not like the fact that we can't use any of our funding for education. That has always been strange to me, and I would like us to identify whose role that is. So those are the two things that stood out for me.
Thanks. I feel like when I had my interview, I was channeling some of the staff, very similar things that came up. One thing that I noticed, and is something of a concern for me as well, and I've talked with staff about this, is that we're standing up programs with short-term funding that really are long-term projects and programs that we're going to need on an annual basis. And the two biggest ones are drought and wildfire recovery, right? Those aren't going away anytime soon, but every year it's like, oh, we're going to get this money from the legislature and we're going to stand this program up, and the staff has to respond super quickly and get it out. And then we had a really great discussion at our last board meeting about when communities are affected by catastrophic wildfire, they're in trauma recovery mode to start with, and they don't have the ability to snap and get an grant proposal put in right away. They're trying to deal, they're processing, they're figuring things out. So they're going to need some time. And we even saw that with our wildfire recovery grants, right? We didn't get a lot of interest in it the first round because everybody was still trying to figure things out and get things together. So we really do have to look at these as more long-term. And I don't know if that's just something we need to hammer home to the legislature, like, hey, no, this has to be continuous funding for this. We're reading the tea leaves and this is what we're saying. So that stood out to me because that's something that I've been really concerned about as well.
Something I would say that kind of really wraps in several of the comments that you all have made, factoring in how does our work impact human communities? How do we deal with climate and long-term drought? I would say that we are seeing that called out very specifically more frequently in restoration proposals that talk about, if we implement this project, this will allow us to hold water up higher in the watershed longer, so that during the hot period of the year, you'll see more flow in streams during the critical period. That's one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of beaver dam analog projects, for example. We've been seeing proposals that come in, like in response to the flood in Umatilla County. If we do this work upstream, it can prevent some of that human impact later, but also rebuild the riparian habitat in the river system upstream of the town. So I think we are seeing that, and I think there's space that when we get to focusing on these priorities, and then as we draw strategies, to talk more specifically about those ideas. I agree with you all that that's something that I think we probably can better articulate than we have in the past.
Bruce?
I'm getting more questions than answers in these things. And one of the questions that I have, as you talk about the different grant types and the issues with short-term grants, I am vaguely aware of various grant programs in natural resource agencies. ODFW has a variety of grant programs, and they administer them, they monitor them, they do all the things Department of Forestry does. Certainly DEQ has a broad array of grants. So there are all these, we are not unique in grant making. And in fact, I've never seen any comparison on dollar amounts, numbers of grants, where they are, when it's looking holistically at the state agency arena. So yeah, maybe they think we'll eat everything, but sometimes I wonder if we're getting some of the things that other people don't want to do. I mean, have they, yeah, that would normally, forestry, it would normally come to us, but maybe hey, Lisa can do that. So I would love to see, just as a board member, I would really be interested in knowing the landscape of grant making and programs across the natural resources agencies in the state of Oregon, what we administer, what we don't administer. Is there duplication of efforts, particularly when it comes to our technical review teams? Is there competition for that expertise across the state through various grant programs? So to me, it's a huge void of ignorance on my part that I would love to fill up.
Thank you for absorbing all of this so effectively. And we need to roll up our sleeves and think about where to go from here, particularly related to the strategic priorities. With permission from the chair, may we take a break? Okay.
How long of a break would you like?
This 10
Everybody?
minutes.
10 minutes?
Work all right?
So see you back here at 3:45. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can everybody find their way back to their seats, please?
How you doing, Barbara? You got this. What did you do? Yeah, you got this. I get it. Yeah, me, same. I just. Yeah. Oh my God. I get it. Yeah. 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 Oh my God. I love that. I'm almost there. You're busier than I am, but I'm almost there. Fun and travel. Yeah, totally. But it's business and personal. Oh, good. Dude, very sweet. Just a good human. Yeah. Enjoyed it. Oh, Kevin? Kevin. He's great. Oh, nice. Oh, good. Yeah.
All right, we'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you and welcome back. You may be wondering where your voices are in this, because we had one-on-one interviews with all of you, and we did prepare a summary that's 7 pages long, because it was riveting, those one-on-one conversations with you. That has been a read for the executive team as well as for the small group that has been really working on designing these strategic priorities. There are some interesting themes emerging from those that we've tried to represent in this new version of the priorities. And there are a few places where there's some areas of variation of perspective as well. For example, how bold and innovative should OWEB be for pressing into areas that are traditionally outside of what you've been focusing on, and then also how concerned some board members are about being distracted by other kinds of projects that are not right at the epicenter. So kind of that tension. Some tension within the perspectives of the board on the definition of diversity and equity as well, in the midst of all that. So we've tried to represent your voice in this version of the priorities, and we'd like to kind of talk this through as we move forward a bit. There were two big themes that I'm sure you're not surprised surfaced quite regularly within our interviews with you. And one was the theme of climate change, which is kind of front and center in your thinking. And the other is the issue of equity as well, and DEIJ. So both of those are significant themes from your interviews that we tried to weave through the 5 priorities that we are bringing forward as draft priorities for you to think about. Just to remind you of where we are, as a result of listening to the external voices as well as the internal voices, we're at a place right now where we'd like to see if we can land on strategic priorities. These are large areas of direction that you would want to move into, large buckets of ideas that once we get a sense from you that these are the right ones, then the staff can take these and begin to develop strategies and operations from them. So what we're not doing right now is talking about specifics or strategies or benchmarks or those kinds of things. We're primarily focused on are these the right 5? And you probably noticed from the strategic plan 5 years ago, we had 7, and now we have 5. There are 2 that are now embedded within these 5. One has to do with working lands. If you remember, there was a strategic priority related to working lands. And the other had to do with funding, diverse and stable funding for organizations and partners as well. So both of those we recognize should not be discarded, but we thought it would be best in this version of the strat plan if they could be elements of other priorities. So that's why we're down to 5 instead of 7. And again, from the board, responses to climate change and DEI issues, you'll see them woven through these priorities. So that's kind of the underlying fundamental areas of emphasis. We have 5 priorities: build broad awareness of relationships. It's similar to the priority 5 years ago. Most of these 5 are similar, but adjusted a bit. And then you saw in the description where we have been thinking about shifts of emphasis given where you are right now. So broad awareness, priority 1. 2, reflect the diversity of Oregonians in watershed work. Priority 3, strengthen community capacity to achieve healthy watersheds. Priority 4, advance learning about watershed restoration effectiveness through coordinating monitoring. So here, monitoring was not the primary point, it's the learning that the monitoring is in service to. It's a means to an end. And then priority 5, take bold and innovative action. We had some discussion about whether we should hold that one, and it is the recommendation from the committee that priority still stands. For this next stretch, I'd like to take the priorities one at a time and invite you to respond as a board to 2 issues related to each priority. 1, what about this priority do you affirm from the proposal of the working committee? And then what about this priority might be shaped further? And we'll be taking notes on this. So areas of this priority that you feel really comfortable with, you're happy with the direction, and then suggestions you have about how to strengthen this. In each priority, you'll see both a description of a higher level shift. So in this one, shift this priority toward elevating success of watershed restoration. So that was the downbeat of the conversation of the committee. And then a few bullet points about what we mean. So these are not strategies, but they're elements or components that are critical features of this strategic priority. So why don't I just read this, and then we'll open it up for discussion, what you affirm, how it might be shaped further, and we'll walk our way through these 5 and see where we land. So priority 1, build broad awareness of the relationship between people and their watershed. Shift this priority toward elevating success of watershed restoration. What we mean is to tell the restoration story clearly and compellingly. Elevate the success of watershed restoration and the benefits to the people of Oregon. Increase awareness for the long-term horizon of watershed outcomes. And highlight the commitment of partners to watershed work. May we hear from you. What do you affirm? What might be shaped further?
Lindsay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to just kind of affirm the whole priority and what you have listed there. I think that that's a theme that I heard throughout the different groups. This is a big focus. I think that we heard from others about what is perception and what is reality. And I would really like to kind of highlight what we are doing and in the existing programs and the efforts that we're taking. I think that telling the restoration story is a really good way to do that. I'm excited to kind of see some of those stories get told. And again, as I was kind of taking notes, potentially too in the weeds about strategies, but how this might be shaped further is, these sound like really good topics for like OPB. And I don't know if we donate to that or not, but seems like it's a statewide opportunity. Just outside of social media, I think that there could be other ways to reach other audiences.
Dan?
Bruce?
Excuse me. The same thing, I'd affirm everything here. I did, and Steve, you had mentioned like the dropping the working lands piece. And when I was reviewing this, I was looking for where that was kind of reincorporated, and it didn't like jump out at me, but it seems like this one here, this priority would be the place to maybe just shape that working lands piece a little further. And I just reflect back on what Liza Jane was saying in her community, which is a lot of working lands people nobody knows about OWEB. And the connection between working lands and the need for restoration in Oregon is profound, right? And so it just struck me as a curiosity that one dropped off. And I think in shaping this one, that might be a good place to spend a little bit of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I'd like to interject some thoughts I have about the whole. And you led me here. And I'm going to ask my fellow board members to help me line me out on this. When I look at these 5 priorities, I see 3, the top 3, 1, 2, and 3, involve education and human beings. It's about social change. And that's really critical and really important, but are we the ones to be taking that on in such a large way? I feel like OWEB is providing grants for people to do work on the ground for wildlife, habitat, the work that needs done to make our world better for nature. And I know humans are part of nature and we're connected there, but I'm seeing this shift of all this people work, this not urban, it's all the people and social issues of people. And, there was housing stuff on here. And if you try and do too much, you don't do anything well. And I'm hearing that, and I'm concerned about it. I didn't mean to drop a bomb.
No, great.
Bruce and then Kelly.
Well, I was still reacting to the comment you made before that one, Jane, about people not recognizing. And I'm not sure that we have the money or the resources to build broad awareness. People who run political campaigns or trying to sell a product are looking to gain votes or gain additional revenue, neither of which broad awareness for OWEB will do. We don't have money that we haven't figured out how to give away. And I look at the bullet points and it looks to me like in many of those, the awareness we're dealing is very specific. I love the telling the restoration story, and I think it can be used in a variety of ways to support partners or maybe to illustrate what we do to groups who have not been partners who might be, and whether they are in a more urban environment, a more urban watershed. That's a possibility. So we've used broad awareness for a long time. and gotten used to it. But I think maybe if we can have a discussion on challenging, is it broad awareness that we really need, and do we want to spend the resources to gain that? Or do we want to be more strategic, specific about where we think the awareness of OWEB will have the most benefit for our mission and our partners who are helping us achieve the mission? So I'd like to at least pinpoint that for further discussion and come back. Quick comments. Yes, to the last comment, the Liza Jane had. The first three priorities have a significant emphasis on people. That said, for me, I've already spoken on priority number one, and I think that's just a decision we need to make on how we market, how we tell the story of OWEB, and why we're telling it, and to whom we're going to tell it. The second two, to me, are justice issues. And but they all have to be in the context of watershed health. So I don't care whether an underserved community is a rural community, and there are plenty of those that live in a specific watershed, a rural community that bear disproportionate impacts of problems with climate and watershed in their watershed. And there are projects that can potentially help them that maybe they don't have the strongest support group locally that we could work with to help develop that. And I think that is equally true in urban communities, in whether they be communities of color or culture, it doesn't matter. So as we work more on the DEI-EJ, I think in the same way that it's a little scary now, I remember the climate resolution was a little scary when we started. So I think as we do that work and start to get it framed back into the specifics of how it applies to watersheds, it should be a little easier to make it fit. And if we're giving away money, it is important for us to do it as justly as we can. So I think I would like to see how we phrase number one and our priority 2 and 3. I mean, we could wordsmith those, but a lot of that actually was in our strategic plan of 2018. Many of those same items were already in there. And some of them were actually a little stronger than are reflected here. We talked about listen, learn, and gather information. And I think we're doing that, and we've done a lot more of that. And certainly, in the last year with the work that Lisa and Stephanie have done on their outreach, we kind of got a late start, but you've done a lot on that in the last 18 months. So I don't want to see us lose those priorities. But I'd be very supportive of having them very specific to the work that we do. For instance, the diversity, I'm getting ahead of it, diversity on the board diversity. Why is that in there? The governor appoints a board. We don't need to tell it. The governor's going to do what the governor does. And so TRT diversity, maybe. Staff diversity, certainly, that's up to staff, but board diversity, yeah, it's not our job. Thanks.
We will continue to talk about priority 2 in just a bit. Thank you for that.
Kelly, I have my eye on you. Okay, and then Steve?
Yeah, so I agree. I affirm the telling the restoration story. I think that's really important here. And also Dan's comments on the working lands and getting that back in here somewhere.
Yes.
I think that's really important. I guess I just kind of have a question in sort of where the line is between education and marketing. You know, how much of this can we do and say we're going to do within the bounds of Measure 76 that isn't creeping into that education versus just marketing OWEB and trying to explain to people what we're doing. So I think that line is a little bit blurred here. And I would love to redo Measure 76 to include education, because I think that would make it a lot easier for us to do some of the things that we need to do and reach that next generation. But if that is not a possibility, then I think we just need to be really careful, because I don't want to promise things or set ourselves up in strategic planning for things that we actually are going to have a hard time implementing because of the constraints that we have.
Steve.
Yeah, this is a follow-up on some of the previous comments, and particularly Liza Jane's comments about learning. Now, being an academic, I'm forced to support learning. And I think that, that's kind of a joke, but I think that the learning and sort of the extension and stakeholder engagement, of course, is very much a part of what we're doing. But if I look at the new 5 priorities versus the past 6, I do think there's a little bit of shift towards the learning and communication in general. You know, that's why I said my previous, I still support that, but in the context of OWEB, and to me, the example is the new priority 4, I know this isn't in order, but where the goal is advance learning about watershed through coordinated monitoring, but the goal is to advance learning. You know, the previous one, which was priority 6 previously, was coordinated monitoring and shared learning to advance restoration effectiveness. So the new one says the goal is learning. The previous one said the goal is restoration effectiveness. And I think that really falls exactly underneath OWEB's goal, is to do restoration and be effective at it. And if that requires learning, if that requires coordinated monitoring, whatever that requires to improve effectiveness, is what OWEB should be doing. And that's the rationale that they should be advancing learning, is to improve effectiveness of the monitoring programs. But have that be one of the top priorities, I don't know if that's going to raise questions, or I don't know if that should be one of our priorities. Now, if you go into the details of what is going to be done under that, the details seem to fall under the previous priorities. So it's just that, anyway.
Thank you, Jamie, and then Barbara.
So thanks, great comments. Just going into this as an overall statement, and I appreciate that you talked about that the equity and climate being interwoven. I will just say that a couple of years ago, we were looking at our committees, and we had this goal of, hey, we're just going to interweave like DEI into our committee work, and that we all had that intent, and that's exactly what we set out to do. And then we realized after about a year, it was dropping off. And so I would just offer that general reflection that we want to make sure that we don't, because we assume good intention, that it's going to drop off. So just as a general overall statement. So when I was looking at these, what really, the question that kept coming to my mind for all of them was what's the purpose of each, bottom line purpose? And it's similar to where Steve got to. And so in this first one, is awareness or results. And in terms of affirmation, I think all this stuff in here is excellent. I think it's really good. In terms of this massaging and how we look at it, some of the reflections I've had as I've listened to my colleagues is to also flag that part of the learning and telling the story also leverages other resources. As we engage our partners, through the community partners who step up and participate, but even as we get Oregonians in general excited about this work, we help to impact everyday decisions that are being made or investments that are being made. So there's some of that tangible and some of that intangible work that's happening. So I don't want to, I really appreciate the concerns of can we do, if it's seen as education, can we do it under 76, yes or no? Do we need other funding, yes or no? But also to realize that the reaching out to non-traditional partners and some of that just general awareness, that may be the role of other agencies as well or other partners, helps us to have a net overall impact of this broader vision of what we're trying to do. And sometimes that's hard to measure, but I do want to call that out. And then also, if we don't tell the story, so I really appreciate, Liza Jane, your comments on, no, let's not focus on storytelling, let's focus on doing the work. If we don't tell the story, the amount of resources to do the work may dwindle, or the support from the legislature. I thought that was one of the really great helpful reflections that staff had, is there some of that, the small p politics reality of any work or any public taxpayer dollars and how they're spent and invested, to make sure that that the legislature and taxpayers understand the value of those investments. If we don't help to, no one else is doing it. And so we could be doing amazing work, but if we do it under, without that being seen by the public, what's not seen is not necessarily valued. And so I really worry about the long-term impact on having the resources or having OWEB if that story isn't told. And then, yeah, so I think that's the summary on this.
Barbara, I'm taking cuts. Just so I can say, I agree, I love stories, and they're powerful, they're so powerful, but do we have to be the ones to do that? I sit on the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund for ODF&W, and we have the same grant making and realize that that story of the success or not of projects needs to be out there. Can we ask the people that receive the funds to tell the story? As part of receiving the funds, we expect to be given credit and tell that story. That's part of this work. So is OWEB responsible to tell the story, or are the people doing the projects on the ground? Can we ask them, can you tell that story? Jamie, as part of a project, the first project we had, I was required to tell the story. I was required by receiving that money to invite people to tour, and I had to tour so many people. It was part of the reward for doing that. So I don't know if we need to be the one, but I want you to know the value of it is incredible. Yeah, Barbara, and then Meg.
So that was exactly where I was going to go with my comment was, well, first of all, when I read this, it's like, we have so many grant offerings and so many grantees, this sounds expensive. It was my first thought. And why could we not ask the grantees to be the one to do telling the story? I mean, I love telling the restoration story. I get a lot out of it, but I almost feel like the grantees would be at the local level. And I did hear that in some of the comments, was there's not a lot of local level. We're up here, but there's not a lot of local level outreach when the grantee gets the money. So why can't they be the one to tell the story in their community? So that was one of my thoughts. And the word broad, I don't like it. Can I offer?
Yes.
Meg, and then
We
Kelly.
have a clarifying comment to interject here.
Steve,
if
yes,
that's
of
okay.
course.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the record, Audrey Hatch. I just wanted to pipe up real quick, largely for Steve's benefit, but a couple of folks have, in my read of your comments, kind of mentioned the Telling the Restoration Story grant offering. And so I just want to let Steve know, OWEB has a Telling the Restoration Story grant offering. It is actually the grantees who do that work to produce those products. It's just a small selective offering that OWEB provides funding for. So I just wanted you to know that and for that to be clear. Thanks.
And I need to interject one comment too. Very clearly, our grantees are telling their restoration stories. If you take a glance at any of our grantees' newsletters, you'll see that, you'll see a recap of what they do. And I think our question is there something broader that really is in OWEB's wheelhouse to do. Because they certainly are doing it. If we asked them to do more, something specific, sure, we could. We'd have to pay for it, put it in, the grant agreements and so forth. But I just wanted to put that on the record that I see an awful lot of really good storytelling from our grantees.
Meg. Yes, thanks. So I actually, when I read this, I was wondering, I'm not sure I get what the shift would be from what we're doing right now. Is there a, I got a short answer to that one?
I think, the shift that we've been kind of walking around here is what exactly are the parameters around our role, what we do. And what I'm hearing very clearly is we need to shift more than what's on here, get rid of the term broad awareness and keep the focus on, I would say, telling the restoration story generically, not just our grant offering, and incorporating working lands into how we're defining this priority. So that's where our focus is, rather than on this broader awareness that's a little bit more general. What I'm hearing is make this more specific to what we do, what we control, what we fund. And I think the common elements there are the incorporation of working lands, narrowing the language here, and yeah, we could do some wordsmithing to accomplish that, because I think we've got, what I'm hearing is consensus among the board that this is written too broadly right now. And so I think we have good direction from you on that.
Can I just a follow up on that? So I just, you said earlier, Eric, why watersheds are so important. And I know that we're the Watershed Enhancement Board and we do restoration, but watersheds are important for reasons that go way beyond that, I think. And I don't know whether when we tell the story, we can point that out, even though we can't necessarily fund some of what, in other words, I'm talking about the way we get information out there. Is it most likely to get people's attention to say, well, they might not be interested in fish populations, but they might be interested in, like drinking water safety or sources and the other reasons why watersheds are important. So I was thinking more about who the audience is and trying to target the audience. The audience is, unfortunately, there's more than one, I guess, right? But to try to get to people where they are, sort of, and to get the point that there are reasons that watersheds are important, that in ways they might not have been thinking about. I thought, I like this idea, though. I'd like to keep it.
Kelly, then Mark.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as far as telling the story goes for the grantee, and Eric and Audrey, you guys hit exactly on what I was thinking. But as someone who has been a grantee through PCSRF, we actually requested funding within one of our PCSRF grants to help us tell our story, to create a story map, essentially, of a project that we did, and then put it out there and circulate it so folks can understand what our project was about, and then have the contact us here if you have more questions. But if we are going to put, and the grantees do a lot of this storytelling on their own, built into their projects already. But if we want them to go over and above and do something like create a story map or something a little more in depth, then we have to be willing to build funding into the grant offerings to help them tell the story, because that takes up staff capacity. If they don't have the technical skills for the story that needs to be told, then they're going to have to contract out for that, yada, yada. There's kind of a lot to it. So I think that's something that we can think about in the future, if we want to put more onus on the grantees, but think about how that's going to impact them.
Mark.
Changing the subject, Steve. Bullet number 4 on priority 1, highlight the commitment of partners to watershed work. I'm not going to fall on my sword for this, but I would propose a different verb instead of highlight. Maybe say emphasize our commitment of partners to watershed work. highlighting just says, brings attention to it. Emphasize means we can't do it without our partners. So we want to emphasize that what makes us work good is partnerships with our partners. So change, highlight to emphasize, if you consider that.
Thank you.
Dan?
Just wanted to say kind of one thing related to the work and lands piece, and also the kind of opportunities that we talked about earlier. One of them being the economic benefit of restoration. And I often think about this because, like, recently, for example, there was a tremendous amount of press about how some forestry practices really had some negative consequences on drinking water in Oregon, right? And it got a lot of legislative attention. You guys got money to do source water protection, et cetera, et cetera. What we don't hear about is the benefits and really the restoration work, and when it's done right, work and lands actually provide a public benefit, right? And so, I mean, part of our restoration story should be that, people who are implementing restoration work and protecting watersheds are providing a public service. That means what they're doing has an economic value, and it flows downstream, whether that's a benefit to fisheries or people who are providing drinking water. Maybe they don't have to spend so much money on treatment. And so there's this sort of connection that I don't know how to make it, but I feel like, if we can, in telling our story, which in my opinion, quite frankly, it's accountability, right? Your OWEB's a public agency. We need to be accountable for the money that we're spending, and that's the story that we're telling. We did all this great stuff with all the money you gave us, hurrah. But to try to fine tune that kind of economic benefit and the actual kind of public service from like a natural infrastructure perspective might be something to think about.
This is,
One more,
please.
and then I think we're good. Lisa?
Thanks. I really appreciate the board's comments and thinking about kind of the narrowing of it. Because really at OWEB, we have one job: make grants. We make grants. There you go. It's in the box. Those grants are for watershed restoration. And even that's a broader term than what's in Measure 76. It talks about fish and wildlife habitat, but it encompasses. So the big stuff has to be done by somebody else in terms of some of the outreach to telling the story. I mean, it's trying to figure out what's our lane in this versus what's someone else's lane. And that's the one thing I think you guys are you're swirling on, is trying to bring that down. But Mr. Williams and I talk about this all the time. What do we do at OWEB? It's not about what OWEB is. OWEB is a grantor. That's our job. It was a pretty simple, straightforward job. So then how do each of these relate to the grant making that we do? I think that's what I've been swirling around in this conversation.
Jamie?
Sorry, it's tied into that, but this is really, I'm wondering, even in preparing this document to help with the development of strategies, what comes after, if we add a for the purpose of, because what I'm hearing from a lot of folks under each of these, if we get to that purpose piece, it can help to, I think, tighten up our understanding. We can agree or disagree with that endpoint, and that may also help with our thinking conversation.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for listening. I hear all of you listening very closely, and that's really nice. Steve?
And this is very valuable. We also have 30 minutes to get through 4 more. So thank you for your contribution, and maybe think strong, not long, as we go into the next 4. Priority 2, significant one here. Change slides. Reflect the diversity of Oregonians in watershed work. So this is where your DEI work lives as well. Shifts this priority toward engagement of all communities. What we mean, pursue diverse representation in watershed work through engagement grant offerings. Thoughtfully pursue board and staff diversity. And we intentionally included that word thoughtfully in there. Increase engagement with non-traditional partners on working lands in rural communities. Engage communities disproportionately influenced by climate change. May we have some discussion about this? What do you affirm and what might we shape further?
Bruce, go ahead.
A couple quick things. I already opined on the board member. I think it should be struck. It doesn't apply. The bullet point, engage communities disproportionately influenced, I think should be changed to impacted. That one is not a question anymore. The rest of it is fleshed out in our 2018 strategic plan, talking about creative funding opportunities. I would hope that when we finish this exercise, that when the board adopts a DEI environmental justice resolution, that staff is able to go back and make sure that what is resolved by the board, as we did in the climate, is accurately reflected in priority 2, all places. I think we'll talk about that as it comes up, but there are places in priority 3 and priority 4 and priority 5 where the information that will be, whatever we decide on the resolution, will have a bearing on the wording of these priorities. So we're a little ahead of that adoption, and I just want to make sure that we don't say this is fine the way it is and then come up with something later. So, and my last comment is just a quick one. This on items 2 and 3. I don't see these as a board member. I do not see these as new grants, particularly new. I think it is our job. It is the job of every state agency, every board, every commissioner, every employee to act justly and to look at our programs and say, are we justly? It's on the wall of the Capitol that the benefits justly apportioned. So I think we've got to stay strong on that one, and the DEI resolution as it is currently, and I think as it will be refined, states that. Thanks.
Meg?
Thank you. I want to affirm this priority. I like this priority. I have a question about, well, one thing respectfully, Bruce, I would leave the board member reference in here, because true that the governor appoints, but there's a process behind that appointment. And, I don't see why OWEB couldn't be kind of stating its desire that diversity influence, these principles affect who gets appointed. But anyway, that's just my thinking on that one. But my question really was the bullet about increasing engagement with non-traditional partners on working lands and rural communities. I wondered about that qualifier for non-traditional partners, whether it's going to bring in all the non-traditional partners, basically. And maybe they show up somewhere else. I was just reading through to see if they do, but maybe just what the thinking is on that.
Barbara and then Jamie.
Just a quick response. Yeah, I think we probably could broaden that, Meg, because we've talked as a group And I think Bruce articulated earlier, there are justice issues in rural communities and urban communities, and we need to factor all of that in.
So how I read this priority, the heading, is the boots on the ground in the watershed work. And then the bullets is the communities affected. And I don't know, it just seems, I almost feel like just reflect the diversity of Oregonians, period, is the header on that. And that's my takeaway on that priority. Thank you. Jamie?
I was channeling, but want to speak to both the points that both you raised. On that first one, so I like this priority. Instead of reflect, what about engage? Because that would really lean into it. That's how I was thinking about it. And then the other, to the board, I think Meg's point's well taken, but also I was thinking about not just pursuing, but also our ongoing education and awareness. I think that could be tied into the board and staff, and we can challenge ourselves to do that. And then, yeah, to that third bullet point, I was going to add urban, but it can also, the qualifier could be taken away either way.
On the board member, Meg, I agree with you. As a public at-large member, not from an agency, I was suggested. Governor doesn't know who I am, so that there is an opportunity there to build diversity, and I'd like to respectfully ask you. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we were strong, but not long.
That was good. Thank you. And great feedback as well. We'll take all of this and do a new version of this for you to consider as a board. Strategic priority 3, strengthen community capacity to achieve healthy watersheds. Shift this priority towards strengthening community organizations to enhance the health of watersheds in their region. Elevate expectations for the quality of watershed work. So this is, let's do better as well as we can. Provide training and technical support to increase internal capacity of organizations, support strategic partnerships, and promote stable funding for sustained watershed work. What do you affirm? How can we shape this better?
Mark?
Well, I'm going to probably beat Bruce to this one, but number 4, provide stable funding for sustained watershed work. We've had discussions on this board about this, our FIP funding, when it runs out, and people say, we need continued funding if we want to continue doing good sustained watershed work, and we say, well, okay, but you can apply for another grant, if you will, for something else, or you could reapply. And so I fully believe in that statement, but it's sometimes difficult to achieve, given that we want to try to fund new projects and new things that are going on in different parts of the state, but also recognize and acknowledge that there's good work going on throughout the state. And if we don't provide some sustainable funding to them, that might go away and they might lose that ability for sustained watershed work. So there's a definite push-pull there, and I don't know how, maybe the wording's okay, but somebody's going to grab that and say, well, on your strategic plan, you said to promote stable funding, and we'd like to continue doing our good work, and we want stable funding. So it's a little bit of a, I don't know how to.
Lindsay.
Thank you. I'd like to affirm this priority. I think it is really important, and it is a bulk of the funding that OWEB provides is capacity to watershed councils and SWCDs. And I think it does take people to make projects happen. So I think it aligns nicely to what Mark just highlighted. Yeah, there could be some stickiness with the 4th bullet. I really like that it does say promote. And I think that OWEB is a really good conduit for cultivating and collaborating partnerships. And just like something that I work in, OWEB is a participating funder, but not a sole funder in some partnerships like Anchor Habitat Investments. And so if we don't have the funding, sometimes we can point them to ODF and W or other places. So I definitely see what you're saying, and I would want to be cautious of that as well. But I think that we are really good at promoting other people's funding as well.
Kelly and then Bruce.
So I think on the promote stable funding for sustained watershed work, I wonder if we can change that wording a little bit to reflect, I think what we would like our grantees to have, especially like our FIP grantees, and I think we actually might have this in there, so this might be something you're already doing, because usually when I suggest something, the staff is like, yeah, we're already doing that. But a sustainability plan, right, is really what we want to promote, especially for our grantees that are getting large funding. So what's your plan after this funding runs out? And I know when I've applied for larger grants in the past, you literally have to write out what your sustainability plan is going to be after that funding ends. So you're already thinking about like, okay, OWEB's going to end, but if I still need continued work for this or funding for this work, where am I going to go for this? Is it internal? Is it external? So maybe if we could change the language to some kind of more sustainability planning or something, that might be helpful in alleviating. And then on bullet point number 1, I would like to affirm bullet points 2 and 3. I think those are great. Bullet point 1, elevate expectations for the quality of watershed work in communities. This seems a little hand wavy to me, and like this can be interpreted in a number of ways. So are we saying right now that we have lower expectations for the quality of work, and so we want to increase those expectations and elevate those expectations for higher quality? Or are we saying we want to elevate the fact that we want quality work, if that makes sense? So I think if we could maybe change the wording on that to be a little more clear, that would probably help.
Thank you.
Could we support the quality of work? And then there isn't the judgment or what you're seeing. I agree with you. Bruce.
On bullet point 3, support strategic partnerships among people, organizations, and agencies. We already do that, so there's no change. But DEI, or the DEI resolution will, I have confidence that it will say that we need to increase strategic partnerships among people, organizations, and agencies. So I would propose that we change that to incentivize and increase strategic partnerships among people, organizations, and agencies. And incentivize doesn't mean necessarily with money. It just means the way we open up our potential grant offerings, demystify them. And then the last one, that stable funding, just as a chance, how about contribute to a stable funding portfolio for sustained watershed work?
Can you repeat real quick, Bruce?
Contribute to a stable funding portfolio for sustained watershed work. I think it did.
Jamie?
So this conversation is also, you can go back to that point of like, to what purpose? Because on that last point, I was thinking help leverage other resources. So the only thing I was, you did a great job, so I like these overall. What I was what I was thinking on this one, I was thinking strengthen and leverage community capacity to achieve healthy watersheds. So I was thinking about that and leverage to the priority statement.
Dan Brown?
I think this one sounds great with all that input, but I've been sitting here thinking about Lisa's comment on the first one about, we're a grant making agency and we need to find other people to do that. And so it makes me wonder, this strategic partner piece, I'm wondering if that also needs to be part of that first priority, because if it's outside of OWEB, it needs to be done. I think we all agree it needs to be done. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're basically saying OWEB can't do it. And so then who can do that? And how do we align and have strategic partnerships to make sure that it gets done?
Steve?
Yeah, I made the mistake of opening our strategic plan, and you know, and I hate to say, Bruce and I were there when this was done, and there was tremendous amount of work in wordsmithing, months and months, as Steve would remember. Every single word was carefully chosen, with some going to the mat on words, and I know staff have done a tremendous job to encapsulate sort of a revision of some of those. But I would suggest at some stage, when we think we've got these all done, we go back and look at the current strategic plan, and ask the question, was anything dropped off the table, or was there better wording and things like that? And the example we're talking about, support strategic partnerships, the way it was worded in our strategic plan is champion best approaches to build these partnerships. So I think we've evolved to something that's close to that, but I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one.
Really good, thank you.
Priority 4, as proposed by the committee, advance learning about watershed restoration effectiveness through coordinated monitoring. So shift this priority toward communication of data, emerging insights, promising practices. What we mean, facilitate the use and development of science-based planning tools, facilitate the exchange of information and insight from monitoring, promote tools and best practices to connect the science to the practitioners, connect people and partners to science to enhance their effectiveness. Might be a little redundant there. Monitor the effectiveness of actions, monitor the effectiveness of actions in pursuit of climate objectives, and invest in long-term monitoring efforts. But to affirm what needs to be shaped.
Start with Bruce.
This is one that I think the DEI-EJ resolution will have an impact on. Bullet points 1 and 3 talking about science. One of the things that's been discussed at length and was kind of new to me was the issue of traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge, environmental practices, all those things, the danger of or the limitations of intellectual monoculture. How we phrase those, how we get them into these bullet points, I don't want to try and wordsmith, but I know that they're going to be affected, and these terms are the way we did it in 2018, and I think we can do it better with the DEI-EJ resolution.
Kelly?
Yeah, that's a great point, Bruce. We could put something in here about incorporating different ways of knowing. So it's a little more broad and incorporates that other knowledge that we're gaining outside of science and what is going to be outside of Western science and what we would be using. So I think that's a really good point. I also think that this priority based on what we heard from external stakeholders and staff, one of the points that jumped out at me was, is this working for the salmon? You know, are we making an impact with what we're doing? And so I feel like this priority really speaks to that, because OWEB is really trying to do a really good job of monitoring and showing where we are having wins, right? So we can communicate where those are, or even with the monitoring that we're doing, showing where we're maybe not being as effective too, which is also a learning tool for people. So I really like this priority overall in that sense. And that also comes back to the telling the story piece too, of what we're doing and what we're learning from it, and how we're then giving that information to people so that they can apply it.
How does connect people and partners to science to enhance their effectiveness? What does that look like? Dan?
I can give you just a very quick example that was shared with me this past week, where these folks had went into a burned area, which we know we're going to have more and more burned areas, and they were evaluating the effects of the burn on millions of dollars of restoration work that was done with beaver dam analogs and whatnot. And there were also some natural kind of log jams, and it was just fascinating. Like, so what they learned is, you know, when placing large wood in streams, where you can place it so it's going to be less susceptible to wildfire. And so to me, that's like a good lesson. Like, this is the future. We learned something here, and that could inform future restoration projects.
How would OWEB make that happen? What you experienced is awesome.
Well, I think by doing this, what they're saying, I think that's what you're saying you're doing here with this, right? It's like you learn and then you inform the restoration providers.
Yeah, thanks. And I can speak a little bit to that, to just add that, you know, ways that OWEB is really connecting people and partners to science to enhance the effectiveness of the partners' work can be around pulling together technical resources and providing information out to folks through the OWEB website, and really sharing some of those lessons learned and best practices. Kelly.
Yeah, I think another way is through the presentations that we have at our board meetings from the different projects. And then sort of spinning off of what Dan said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I don't know how many folks have seen this in here, but the Klamath tribes did a cultural burn. They did some thinning and a cultural burn on some of their property that ended up being a part of the bootleg fire. And when you see the photo of the area that was thinned and then had the cultural burn, it is an island of green in a sea of dead black trees within the bootleg fire. And so that's one sort of traditional knowledge point that I think OWEB, as a part of these projects, not only are we looking at like the Western science end of things, but also sharing things like that from the work that our partners are doing as well, to share kind of some of the traditional knowledge and how that's having an effect on the landscape too. And that one was, I mean, literally just as simple as like, let me show you this photo and tell you what we did. And it was maybe like a 10-minute presentation, and it's one of the most impactful presentations I've seen in the last year. So I think things like that too. So having our grantees sort of telling those stories too, and then connecting that with the monitoring that we're doing, I think would be really good.
Jane.
I think on this one, I think the priority is really good. I don't know what the language is, but I think tightening up that priority language, because as I'm seeing this, I'm seeing measure, report, enhance effectiveness, and pursue results is what I'm hearing and what I think is, but I don't think it's And then also on the priority name, we talked before about having limiting factors through coordinated monitoring. There's probably other things that work can be done through other ways as well, so we might not want to qualify it as much. And then I really appreciate the point that you both made about traditional indigenous knowledge. I would just encourage that language to actually say that and be specific to it, because if we do, respectfully, if we do say something like different ways of knowing, that could get really broad really quick. And so if that's specifically what we're talking about, I think we should just say it, because it's also very, it makes sense because it's historical, and so there's no reason to not just say it directly, but that will keep us from getting too vague, I think, on that.
Jamie, can I add, and Kelly, when you said that other ways of knowing, I think about landowners and people who have been on the land and they're not indigenous and they don't maybe have data, but they have knowledge. And so that's really inclusive language. And it's always a toss up of how to say everything in a small amount of time or space, but I really appreciate that.
No, maybe then some experience with, because I can imagine some really out of left field, and if we use language too broad, that it could get maybe not taken as seriously. But I think your point is very well taken. So that experience with the land, maybe there's some way to hone into the idea that you have without making it too broad. I just striking that balance, but point very well taken.
So I think maybe both. I was over here doing this motion and Mark was like, just say it. So if we could kind of get that like different ways of knowing language, and then also we can put specifically indigenous knowledge in there too. That way it acknowledges both of them. Because yeah, you're right, that's a Jane.
Steve, look at us. 5 minutes.
This is remarkable. I didn't think it was going to happen. Priority 5, we have 5 minutes for this. And as you're thinking about priority 5, I'm also wondering about Liza Jane's comment a while back. Should we consider instituting a 6th priority that kind of balances the people and the environment? You can send us away to work on that if you'd like as well. Strategic priority 5, take bold and innovative action. Shift this priority toward important interventions to respond to climate change and emerging issues. It's a bit of a catch-all category here, but leaning toward pursuing and supporting experimental programs, making room to try new techniques in restoration, designing action to respond and mitigate the effects of climate change on watershed health, identify and develop new and innovative ways to pursue watershed health and communicate climate change benefits.
When we were doing the climate resolution, we had 6 be it further resolved actions. And Lisa at the time suggested that those were the types of things that would go into it should go into this strategic plan. And I think we all agreed with her. The DEI-EJ resolution currently, again, has 6 be it further resolves in that as well. Some of them overlap, and I don't think we need to highlight each and every one of them, but I would ask that we have a bullet point. I would actually ask for 2 bullet points under 5. One is to reduce barriers and incentivize changes necessary. 2, and then and I'm not sure you guys can figure out how to do it. The second bullet point tied to it is to incorporate strategies approved within the climate and DEI-EJ board resolutions. So those things that were approved by this board to go into it, iterated that way, don't have to be individually if we do it in a way that says they're all there.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Jamie?
Just following on the conversation last one, it's sometimes the old is new. And so our own awareness, we've started to talk about some of the traditional practices and knowledge of things that have worked or not worked. And so I think the and here, it's not nor, but it's an and, is having some bullet point that reflects that. So we're not just trying just new things, but we're also looking back at what's worked and incorporating that to our work.
Old and proven. Like Steve.
On that note, oh, Mark, go ahead.
I just have kind of a process question. So when I look at the previous strategic plan, we had 7 priorities, and then underneath that, we had strategies, fairly lengthy. And this is the intent with these priorities is to shorten it up and be more, I guess, strategic. Is that the intent, or will you now have strategies underneath of this? Or, okay, so that's the next step, is to take those priorities and then develop the strategies underneath.
Yes, that's the
Okay.
intent. These priorities as large directional headings
And then
that
next,
then we'll identify more specific
so next
strategies.
is meat on the bone then.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
May I ask also, would you like for us to go away and see if we can bring back a 6th priority to balance the people and the environment priorities? Or is this sufficient, what we have here?
Kelly.
Would that 6th priority be the one that incorporates working lands? Okay. Then I would say yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Do you want to do next steps?
Yes, thanks, Steve. And here you see our next steps up on the screen. As Steve just mentioned, we will go back and rework first these priorities in accordance with all of the great feedback, very detailed feedback that you gave. You saw us taking substantial notes, so we're going to work on that and begin to identify those strategies, which will be 3 or 4-ish under each strategic priority. We'll come back to you in January to review those. And then from that point, it really gets into our operational plan. And that we hope to be able to present to you some operational plans at the April board meeting. And we do want to examine that operational plan for risk, resources, capacity. We need to make sure we're keeping to the who we are, the foundational elements that we talked about at the very beginning. And in accordance with the governor's directive, and as we should anyway, create an evaluation plan for the outputs and the outcomes that come out of this. Anything else to add, Steve or Audrey?
Thank you. So, yes, ma'am?
So before anybody leaves the room, Nicole needs to talk to all of us. So don't leave the room. Are we actually adjourning? Because this wasn't really a meeting, was it?
Yes, it is a
I
meeting.
didn't feel, okay, I didn't feel like we opened it.
It's live coming at you right now.
Okay, so for tonight, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing your brains and experience, knowledge, and words. We'll adjourn our meeting for tonight and turn this over to Nicole to talk to us about how we enjoy some food.